Hey guys, tonight we're heading straight into the tangled love life of the Olympian gods, which is about as safe as wandering blindfolded through a field full of rakes. This time it's Zeus, Hera, and a perfectly innocent mortal girl named Io who ends up getting the short end of the divine stick, literally transformed into a cow for reasons you're going to shake your head at. And no, you probably won't survive this one either, because if a god decided you were interesting, you'd likely be a tree, or a bird, or in Io's case, chewing cud in the corner of a pasture before you could blink. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop a comment with your location and local time. It's always fascinating to see where everyone is in the world as we drift through ancient myths together. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. The story starts in the shimmering sunlight of ancient Greece, in the bustling city of Argos. You're walking through marble-pillared temples and dusty streets, merchants calling out their wares and children darting between stalls. The scent of roasted lamb and honey cakes clings to the air. Somewhere in the heart of this lively city is Io, a young priestess serving Hera, queen of the gods. She's devoted, graceful, and, unfortunately for her, stunningly beautiful. That combination is like a beacon for Zeus, who happens to be watching the world below from his lofty throne on Olympus. Zeus isn't exactly known for self-control. Scholars still argue whether he was genuinely smitten or simply bored, but his roving eye settles on Io with a kind of intensity that spells trouble. You picture him leaning on the marble rail of Olympus, golden hair gleaming, thinking, "Yes, that mortal looks like someone I absolutely must interfere with." And if you're wondering, why does Zeus always do this? Well, no one has a good answer. Some blame fate, others divine impulsiveness. The result is always the same: chaos for whoever is unlucky enough to catch his gaze. You follow Io as she performs her duties in Hera's temple, lighting incense and sweeping the sacred floor with quiet devotion. She has no idea she's being watched, no idea that her life is about to veer wildly off course. Zeus, meanwhile, is already devising a plan to approach her. Disguises are his specialty: bulls, swans, showers of gold. He's basically a one-god costume department. But even he knows that getting close to a priestess of Hera, of all goddesses, is going to be complicated. Here's a mainstream historical fact. Priestesses in ancient Greek religion often held significant influence. They oversaw rituals, guarded sacred sites, and were respected by their communities. Io's position would have made her untouchable to most mortals. But when you're Zeus, untouchable is more of a challenge than a boundary. The quirky detail? Some versions of the myth say Io had already noticed Zeus in her dreams, where he appeared in dazzling, vaguely ominous forms. She tried to resist, even begging Hera for protection, but that only made her situation worse. Hera, suspicious by nature and especially wary of Zeus's wandering affections, would have seen this as a red flag the size of a temple. You imagine Io looking up at the bright blue sky one afternoon, a chill racing down her spine even though the sun is warm. She can't explain it, but something feels off, like someone's watching her. And she's right. High above, Zeus's plan is taking shape. He's not the kind of god to wait patiently, and the moment he decides he wants something, the gears of destiny start grinding inexorably forward. Section 2. Hera, as queen of the gods, isn't exactly a fool. She's been married to Zeus long enough to recognize the signs, the lingering glances, the distracted expression, the mysterious absences. You can practically feel her suspicion building like a summer storm as she surveys Olympus from her throne, her sharp eyes narrowing when she catches Zeus staring down at Argos a little too often. In the mortal world, Io continues her temple duties, blissfully unaware that she's become the focus of divine drama. She moves through the temple courts, pouring libations, whispering prayers, and keeping her head down. But Hera isn't keeping hers down. She's scanning the world below for any hint of impropriety, and the moment she notices Zeus's gaze lingering on a mortal priestess, especially one serving in her temple, her hackles rise. Mainstream historical fact: Hera was widely regarded as a goddess of marriage and family, but her myths often depict her as fiercely jealous and quick-tempered, especially when Zeus was involved. This isn't surprising, given that Zeus's affairs tended to involve mortals, nymphs, and occasionally livestock. Scholars still debate whether Hera's image as a wrathful wife is a reflection of genuine cult practices or a literary device meant to highlight Zeus's flaws. Either way, the myths make it clear: Hera is no one to mess with. Quirky detail: Hera had a reputation for disguising her suspicions with feigned politeness, at least at first. Some myths even suggest she would casually quiz other gods about Zeus's whereabouts, smiling sweetly as she set her traps. Imagine being asked by Hera where Zeus has gone. You'd probably break into a cold sweat just from the tone of her voice. You picture Hera descending from Olympus in a swirl of peacock feathers, landing softly on the earth as she approaches the temple of Argos. She doesn't storm in. That would be too obvious. Instead, she arrives with the air of a dignitary, her divine presence causing mortals to drop to their knees. Hera's eyes scan the temple grounds, searching for any sign of Zeus, but all she sees is Io, a mortal priestess who seems as startled as anyone by the goddess's sudden appearance. Hera doesn't miss the way Io flinches under her gaze. The poor girl can feel the weight of suspicion, even if she doesn't understand it. Hera steps closer, her smile as sharp as a blade. "Have you seen my husband?" she asks, voice deceptively gentle. Io stammers a reply, insisting she has not. And she hasn't. But Hera knows that Zeus's schemes rarely announce themselves in advance. Meanwhile, Zeus is watching this from afar, heart pounding like a guilty teenager caught sneaking out. He knows Hera's temper, and he also knows that if she even suspects he's interested in Io, the consequences will be disastrous. He needs a plan, and fast. Scholars still argue whether Hera's suspicions were fully formed at this point, or if she was simply acting on instinct. Either way, the tension between the divine couple is palpable, and Io is trapped in the middle of it like a deer on a dark road, blinking at the oncoming headlights of fate. You imagine Io trying to return to her duties, but every creak of the temple doors makes her jump. Every shadow in the corner feels like Hera watching. The once peaceful sanctuary now feels like a gilded cage. And somewhere above, Zeus is pacing, racking his brain for a way to protect the mortal girl he's hopelessly enamored with, without provoking the goddess who can make his life, and Io's, a living nightmare. Section 3 Zeus, for all his flaws, isn't entirely oblivious to danger. He knows Hera is circling closer and closer, her suspicion sharpening with every passing day. So, in a move that even he might admit is desperate, he decides the best way to keep Io safe is to hide her, by turning her into something Hera would never suspect. And because Zeus's ideas rarely involve subtlety, he chooses a form that is both obvious and bizarre. A flawless, snow-white cow. Picture this, Io walking through the temple courtyard 1 minute, the sun filtering through the olive trees, and in the next, her limbs elongate and twist, her voice collapsing into a frightened bellow as her soft skin blooms into a hide of milk-white fur. She stumbles on new legs that feel too long, too awkward. And when she glances into the polished bronze basin at the temple's altar, she sees not her own face, but the wide, liquid eyes of a cow staring back at her. Mainstream historical fact. Transformation myths were common in Greek mythology, often as a way for gods to disguise themselves or punish mortals. These transformations were rarely voluntary, and usually served as a reminder of the god's absolute power. Io's story is a prime example of how mortals were little more than pawns in divine games. The quirky tidbit here is that some versions of the myth suggest Zeus turned Io into a cow not only to hide her, but also because he panicked. There's no grand plan, just the instinct to cover up the evidence before Hera could catch him. Historians still argue whether this was truly a protective move or if Zeus simply wanted to avoid Hera's wrath at all costs, even if it meant utterly humiliating Io. You can almost hear Io's terrified breathing as she stands there, tail swishing nervously. She tries to speak, to explain herself, but only a low, mournful moo escapes her throat. Zeus appears beside her, whispering apologies she can no longer answer, promising that it's only temporary, that she'll be safe now. But Io can see the fear in his eyes, the way he glances over his shoulder as though Hera could materialize at any moment. And of course, Hera does. She descends from Olympus with the elegance of a queen who knows she's about to ruin someone's day. Her peacock-feathered cloak ripples behind her as she steps into the temple courtyard, her gaze immediately falling on the cow, Io, standing stiff and silent beside Zeus. Hera tilts her head, her expression unreadable. "That's a lovely heifer," she says, voice laced with honey. Zeus forces a laugh, the kind of laugh you give when you know you're caught, but you're pretending everything is fine. "Oh, this? Just a random cow," he says, patting Io's head a little too hard. "Found her grazing in a meadow." Hera's smile doesn't reach her eyes. She's not buying it for a second. Scholars still debate whether Hera recognized Io immediately or simply suspected that Zeus was hiding something. Either way, the goddess knows how to play the long game. She steps closer, her hand brushing Io's silky white coat, and murmurs, "She's perfect. I think I'd like to have her." You can feel the dread rolling off Zeus as he realizes what's about to happen. He can't refuse Hera without confirming her suspicions, but handing Io over is unthinkable. Io, trapped in her bovine body, lowers her head and lets out a soft, frightened low, as if begging Zeus not to abandon her. But Hera's request hangs in the air like a snare, and Zeus is about to find himself caught in it. Section 4. Zeus feels the trap snap shut around him the moment Hera makes her request. Her voice is sweet, but there's iron underneath it, the kind that promises doom if he dares refuse. He tries to smile, to stall, but Hera's hand is already resting on Io's neck, stroking her snow-white fur like she's claiming her prize. You can imagine Zeus's mind spinning wildly. If he says no, Hera will know without a doubt that this cow is more than a cow. If he says yes, Io will be entirely at Hera's mercy, and Hera is not known for mercy when it comes to Zeus's interests. His jaw tightens, his fingers twitching at his side, and Io, poor Io, watches with wide, liquid eyes. She can't speak, can't plead, can only tremble as her fate hangs in the balance. Mainstream historical fact. Gift-giving and exchange were deeply embedded in ancient Greek culture. Refusing a request for a gift, especially from someone of equal or higher status, was a serious breach of etiquette and could lead to major fallout. Hera knows this perfectly well. Her demand is not just emotional, but cultural leverage. The quirky tidbit. Some storytellers claim Hera's request was accompanied by an almost comical display of faux innocence. "Oh, this cow is lovely," she might have cooed, circling Io slowly. "You wouldn't mind if I kept her, would you? It would please me so." Historians still argue whether this was Hera playing coy or simply twisting the knife, knowing Zeus would have no good way out. Zeus, grinding his teeth, gives the only answer he can. "Of course, my queen," he says through a tight smile, his voice full of a dread he tries to hide. "She's yours." And with those words, Io is led away, her hooves clopping softly on the temple stones as Hera's attendants guide her into the goddess's care. Io doesn't fight. What could she do, but every step away from Zeus feels heavier, like she's sinking into a fate she can't escape. Hera's satisfaction is almost palpable. She doesn't confront Zeus directly, doesn't scream or rage. Instead, she plays the long game, her mind already spinning with ways to make Io's new life as miserable as possible. Hera doesn't waste time. She places Io under the watch of Argus Panoptes, the 100-eyed giant whose vigilance is legendary. You can picture Argus looming over Io, each eye gleaming like a tiny lantern, ensuring that not a moment passes without someone watching. The poor girl barely gets to graze in peace. Every twitch of her tail, every attempt to wander, is noted by one of Argus's unblinking eyes. Scholars still debate whether Hera's motivations here were purely jealous, or if she genuinely believed Io was complicit in Zeus's schemes. Some versions of the myth paint Hera as a wronged wife lashing out at a rival. Others depict her as cruel and calculating, punishing Io simply because she could. Whatever the truth, Io's life as a cow is one long chain of humiliations and fear. Zeus, meanwhile, is furious. He watches from Olympus, helpless and seething as Io is paraded under Argus's watchful gaze. But Hera has boxed him in completely. Any attempt to intervene now would only confirm her suspicions and likely bring even worse consequences down on Io. Io, grazing in a meadow one evening under Argus's relentless supervision, lifts her head and lets out a soft, mournful low. The stars above glimmer indifferently, and somewhere far away, Zeus clenches his fists and vows to find a way to save her. Hera, however, is perfectly content. For now she's won. Section 5, the meadow where Io now grazes, is peaceful in a way that feels almost cruel. Birds flit overhead, the wind stirs the grass in gentle waves, and the sun dips low in a soft golden glow. Yet Io knows none of it can soothe her. Standing in the middle of the field, she is the center of a prison without walls. Argus Panoptis, the hundred-eyed watchman, looms nearby like a living fortress, his gaze unbroken even as the horizon fades to night. Argus is a figure out of nightmare. His enormous frame is draped in a cloak the color of storm clouds, each of his many eyes set in his face and across his body, flickering open and shut at intervals. Some watch the ground for movement, others scan the horizon, and at least a dozen are fixed on Io at all times. The girl-turned-cow feels the weight of those stares pressing into her hide. She shifts uncomfortably, flicking her tail, but there's no escape from Argus's scrutiny. Mainstream historical fact: Argus Panoptes was a well-known figure in Greek myth, a servant of Hera renowned for his unmatched vigilance. The hundred eyes metaphor wasn't just poetic. It symbolized total awareness, the ability to see in every direction at once. Ancient sources often describe him as a monster, but some portray him as a loyal guardian, a being who saw Hera's orders as sacred duty. Here's a quirky tidbit. Storytellers say that half of Argus's eyes were always awake while the other half slept, making him virtually impossible to sneak past. Historians still argue whether this detail was meant to elevate Argus as an unstoppable force, or simply as a cautionary tale about being too good at your job. Either way, Io had no chance of escaping him alone. Hera's command is clear: guard the cow. Do not let her wander. And certainly do not let Zeus come near her. Argus takes his charge seriously, never straying far. When Io moves, Argus moves. When Io tries to edge toward the tree line, Argus shifts to block her path. His unblinking vigilance makes every moment of freedom feel like an illusion. Meanwhile, Zeus is losing his patience on Olympus. He's not used to being thwarted, and Hera's victory is a thorn in his side. Io's soft, sorrowful moos carry up to him on the wind, gnawing at his conscience. Something has to be done. But Zeus knows better than to confront Hera directly. That would only make Io's situation worse. He needs subtlety, a skill he's not exactly famous for. Enter Hermes. The messenger god, sly and clever, is exactly the ally Zeus needs. You can picture Zeus pulling Hermes aside, lowering his voice as he explains the situation. Hermes raises an eyebrow, smirks faintly, and assures his father that he knows how to handle Argus. After all, if anyone can outwit 100 eyes, it's the god of tricks and travelers. Io, grazing under Argus's watch, notices nothing of this divine plotting. All she knows is that her days are a blur of grass and watchful stares, her nights punctuated by the faint rustle of Argus shifting positions, half his eyes closed, half open. She's growing tired, frightened, and hopeless. But far away, Hermes is already preparing his instruments, a softly tuned lyre, a pouch of magical herbs, and a plan that will test even his legendary cunning. Scholars still debate whether Hermes acted out of loyalty to Zeus or genuine pity for Io. The myths don't say much about his feelings, only that he carried out his mission with precision. What is clear is that Io's only chance at freedom now rests with the god who wears winged sandals and a smile that can talk anyone into anything. Section 6, the plan to free Io begins on a cool, misty morning. Argus is in his usual position, a looming shadow against the pale light, his 100 eyes glimmering like polished stones. Io grazes quietly, her head down, pretending not to notice how many eyes are trained on her every twitch. She's learned that defiance leads nowhere. Argus is unshakable, but Hermes is already on the move. The messenger god slips through the mortal world with the ease of a whisper, his winged sandals skimming just above the ground. He carries a lyre slung casually across his back, and a staff entwined with twin serpents, a sign of his divine authority. And because Hermes never misses an opportunity for a little drama, he hums a soft tune as he approaches, letting his presence be known long before he's in sight. Mainstream historical fact: Hermes was often depicted in Greek myth as a trickster figure, capable of charming and deceiving even the most vigilant opponents. He was also considered the protector of travelers, merchants, and thieves, roles that demanded a unique mix of diplomacy and cunning. This reputation makes him the perfect candidate for Zeus's delicate rescue mission. Argus notices Hermes almost immediately. Of course he does, with 100 eyes scanning every direction. Half his eyes stay fixed on Io, while the other half track Hermes's slow, unhurried approach. "Who are you?" Argus demands, his voice deep and resonant, like boulders shifting in a cave. Hermes smiles easily, bowing low with exaggerated respect. "A traveler," he says, strumming a few gentle notes on his lyre. "I was passing through and thought I might rest here a while. Would you object if I played a bit of music for company?" Here's the quirky tidbit. Some versions of the myth claim Hermes spun elaborate stories as he played, weaving tales of gods and mortals that captivated Argus's many minds. Others say he simply relied on the hypnotic power of music, letting the lilting melodies seep into Argus's bones. Historians still argue whether Hermes's victory was a triumph of words or song, but either way, his performance was legendary. Argus, perhaps bored of endless vigilance, doesn't refuse. He settles into a crouch nearby, keeping most of his eyes on Io, but allowing a few to rest on Hermes. The messenger god takes his time, plucking soft notes from his lyre that flutter through the meadow like moths. The music is calming, almost too calming, and one by one, Argus's eyes begin to blink slower and slower. Io watches with a mix of hope and disbelief. Could it really be this simple? She doesn't dare move, doesn't dare even flick her tail for fear of breaking the spell. Hermes meets her gaze briefly, a subtle nod that says, "Patience." The song grows slower, softer, until the very air seems to hum with drowsiness. Argus's head droops, half his eyes closed, then 3/4, then more. Hermes adjusts his tempo with surgical precision, coaxing the last few stubborn eyes into surrender. Finally, Argus collapses into a deep, unguarded sleep, every single eye shut. Scholars still debate whether Hermes used magic to ensure Argus's slumber, or if his musical skill alone was enough. Either way, the result is the same. The Watchman is vulnerable for the first time since Hera assigned him to guard Io. Hermes stands slowly, the strings of his lyre still vibrating from the final note, and gestures for Io to follow. She hesitates only a moment before stepping forward on shaky legs, her hooves crunching softly against the grass. Freedom is so close, she can almost taste it. But Hermes knows they aren't out of danger yet. Hera's wrath will be swift once she learns her plan has been foiled. And there's still the matter of ensuring Argus can't simply wake up and resume his watch. The messenger god tightens his grip on his staff, a determined glint in his eye. The next part of the plan will be far less gentle. Section 7. Hermes steps quietly around the sleeping form of Argus, the weight of the moment heavy in the meadow's stillness. Io stands frozen a few paces away, her large, liquid eyes darting nervously between the messenger god and the 100-eyed giant sprawled in the grass. She knows, instinctively, that their chance at freedom hangs by a thread. Hermes kneels by Argus, the soft rustle of his indigo cloak blending with the breeze. His staff, the caduceus, gleams faintly in the early morning light. He studies Argus's massive form, every slow breath rattling through the giant's chest, and you can almost hear Hermes's thoughts, if even one of those eyes opens. Mainstream historical fact, Hermes wasn't just a messenger, he was also a guide to souls in the afterlife. This dual role made him a god of both beginnings and endings, a figure capable of crossing boundaries other deities avoided. That aspect of his nature is on full display here, as he prepares to ensure Argus can no longer threaten Io's freedom. Quirky tidbit: ancient storytellers disagree on exactly how Hermes dispatched Argus. Some say he used his staff to deliver a single fatal blow. Others claim he simply drew a blade and acted swiftly, ensuring the giant wouldn't wake. Scholars still argue whether Hermes killed Argus out of necessity or pity, but the result was the same. Hera's loyal watchman would watch no more. Hermes takes a steadying breath and raises his staff. The moment stretches impossibly long, the meadow holding its breath. Then, with one fluid motion, he brings the staff down. The strike is precise, almost merciful, and Argus doesn't stir again. His 100 eyes, once so vigilant, remain closed forever. Io flinches at the sound, her hooves scraping against the earth. She doesn't look away, though. She knows the cost of freedom often comes with a price she doesn't fully understand. Hermes rises and brushes the grass from his hands, his expression unreadable. "We have to move quickly," he says, glancing toward the distant horizon. Scholars still debate whether Hermes felt any remorse for Argus's fate. Some versions of the myth suggest he honored the fallen watchman by collecting his eyes and placing them in Hera's sacred peacock feathers, where they would watch the world for eternity. Whether that detail was meant as comfort or irony is unclear, but it's one of those small, poetic touches Greek myths are famous for. Io steps closer to Hermes, her ears flicking nervously. She doesn't need words to express her gratitude. The look in her eyes is enough. Hermes offers a small nod in return, but he doesn't linger. Hera will know soon, he warns. We have to keep moving. The two of them slip away from the meadow, the grass whispering behind them. Every sound seems louder now. The rustle of leaves, the call of distant birds, as though Hera herself might be listening. Io's heart pounds as she follows Hermes through wooded hills and narrow streams. The taste of freedom so new it almost feels unreal. But Hera does notice. On Olympus, the queen of the gods receives the news with a fury that makes the clouds darken over the earth. Her loyal watchman is gone, and Io has slipped through her fingers. Hera's anger doesn't fade. It sharpens, hardening into a new plan. She might have lost Io once, but she will make sure the girl-turned-cow never knows peace again. Far below, Io grazes in a meadow Hermes has led her to, her muscles still tense with fear. For the first time in what feels like forever, she's free of Argus's watchful gaze. But even as she lowers her head to drink from a sparkling brook, a shiver crawls up her spine. Somewhere, Hera is already plotting the next stage of her vengeance, and Io's ordeal is far from over. Section 8, Hera's fury is a storm you can feel in your bones. The queen of the gods doesn't scream or rage. That would be too easy. Instead, she channels her wrath into something more enduring, more cruel. Argus, her loyal watchman, is gone, and Hermes and Zeus have slipped through her fingers. But Io is still out there, vulnerable and terrified, and Hera intends to make sure she never forgets what it means to be at the mercy of a goddess. You can picture Hera on Olympus, her peacock-feathered cloak fluttering behind her like a banner of vengeance. She summons a creature that will become the bane of Io's existence, a gadfly, small enough to be overlooked, relentless enough to be torture. The insect lands delicately on Hera's finger, its wings buzzing with anticipation, and the goddess whispers her orders. Mainstream historical fact. Gadflies were a real nuisance in ancient Greece, especially in rural pastures. Farmers dreaded the persistent bites of these insects, which could drive livestock to madness. The myth of Hera sending a gadfly after Io draws on that lived experience, turning a common pest into a symbol of divine cruelty. Here's the quirky tidbit. Some storytellers say Hera imbued the gadfly with a fragment of her own divine will, ensuring it would never tire, never die, and never leave Io in peace. Historians still argue whether this detail was meant to emphasize Hera's ingenuity or her vindictiveness, but either way, the result was the same. Io's first encounter with the gadfly is pure panic. She's grazing in a sunny field when it lands on her flank, biting with sharp precision. She bucks, kicks, and twists, but the tiny tormentor is impossible to shake. She plunges through the grass, crashing into trees and streams as the insect follows, its buzzing relentless. Her low, desperate moos echo across the countryside. a sound that breaks even Zeus's heart as he watches helplessly from Olympus. Io's flight becomes a journey of misery. She crosses hills and valleys, rivers and forests, her hooves bleeding and her body trembling from exhaustion. Everywhere she goes, the gadfly follows. She tries to rest under the shade of ancient olive trees, but the biting resumes the moment she closes her eyes. She wades through cool rivers, hoping to drown her tormentor, but it hovers just above the surface, waiting for her to emerge. Scholars still debate whether Hera's punishment was meant solely for Io, or if it was also a way of humiliating Zeus, forcing him to watch the suffering of someone he cared for. Regardless, Io's path takes her farther and farther from home, each step driving her deeper into unfamiliar lands. One night, under a pale crescent moon, Io stumbles upon the ruins of a long-abandoned temple. She presses herself into the crumbling stone for shelter, her flanks heaving as she tries to catch her breath. For a few fleeting minutes, the gadfly disappears, the buzzing fading into the night. But Io knows it's only temporary. She can't stay. She sets out again at dawn, the world stretching endlessly before her. Mountains loom in the distance, jagged and unforgiving, but there's no choice but to climb. Along the way, she encounters mortals and other mythic figures, some who pity her, others who fear her strange, silent presence. A white cow wandering the earth, eyes wide with sorrow, is an omen no one can ignore. Io presses on, driven by the faint hope that her suffering might one day end. But Hera's wrath is tireless, and the gadfly returns, nipping at her heels, as if to remind her that freedom is an illusion. She crosses rivers so wide they seem like oceans, and plains so vast she feels as though she'll fall off the edge of the world. Still, she moves forward, each step a testament to her resilience. Section 9, Io's journey stretches into weeks, maybe months. You lose track of time when you're constantly running from a buzzing tormentor. She trudges through lands so distant from her home in Argos that she no longer recognizes the constellations above her. Every sunrise brings the same reality: endless wandering, endless biting, endless fear. Yet she keeps moving, her white coat matted with dust and sweat, because staying still means giving in. And Io refuses to give Hera that victory. One day, Io's hooves carry her across a narrow strait of water, the waves lapping against her legs as she wades from one continent to another. In Greek mythology, this crossing would later become famous. It was believed that the Bosporus, the strait between Europe and Asia, was named for this very moment. Bos meaning cow, poros meaning passage, mainstream historical fact. Ancient Greeks often used myths to explain the names of geographical landmarks, and Io's wanderings were no exception. But even with the weight of destiny in every step, Io is exhausted. She stops at a grassy knoll, her sides heaving, hoping the gadfly will leave her alone long enough for a real rest. No such luck. The tiny tormentor finds her again, darting at her eyes and ears with renewed vigor. Io thrashes and kicks, nearly tumbling down a steep embankment in her desperation to escape. Quirky tidbit: some versions of the myth claim that Io's frantic wanderings brought her into contact with other mythic figures, like Prometheus, who was chained to a rock by Zeus for stealing fire. In those tellings, Prometheus offered her cryptic advice, warning her that her suffering would one day end in Egypt, and that she would bear a child destined for greatness. Historians still argue whether this meeting was a later addition, meant to weave Io's story into the broader mythological tapestry, or if it was always part of the tale. Whether she met Prometheus or not, Io pushes forward with renewed determination, clinging to the hope that somewhere, somehow, this nightmare will end. She descends into vast plains, crosses scorching deserts, and endures storms that lash her with rain and wind. The world is enormous and uncaring, but Io's spirit refuses to break. Finally, after what feels like an eternity, she reaches the fertile banks of the Nile River in Egypt. The gadfly hovers close behind, but Io senses something different here. The air is thick and warm, the landscape lush with life. She collapses at the water's edge, drinking deeply, her reflection rippling in the river's surface. She almost doesn't recognize the tired cow staring back at her. Zeus has been watching Io's torment the entire time, his guilt mounting with every mile she travels. He knows Hera won't relent on her own, and at last, he decides he can't leave Io in this misery any longer. The king of the gods prepares to plead for her release, a humbling act that speaks to how dire the situation has become. Scholars still debate how much influence Hera wielded over Zeus in these moments. Was he truly powerless to stop her, or did he hesitate out of fear of confrontation? The myths aren't clear, but what is clear is that Io's suffering is about to reach its conclusion. Zeus prepares to bargain with Hera, knowing that the queen of the gods will only relent if she feels she's won. For Io, there's no inkling of what's to come. She curls up in the reeds by the Nile, the buzzing of the gadfly temporarily muted by the rushing water. She has nothing left to give, her body trembling from exhaustion. And yet, deep inside, there's a fragile ember of hope. Section 10. Zeus descends from Olympus with a heaviness he rarely shows. He's not used to groveling, not used to asking for mercy, especially from Hera. But Io's suffering has stretched on too long, and even the king of the gods can't stand by any longer. You picture Zeus standing before Hera in the gleaming halls of Olympus, shoulders squared but voice quieter than usual, as he pleads for Io's release. Hera listens, her expression as smooth as marble. She doesn't interrupt, doesn't lash out. That would be too easy. Instead, she lets Zeus twist, savoring the rare sight of him asking for something he can't simply take. When he finishes, Hera simply tilts her head and asks, "And why should I?" Mainstream historical fact. The power dynamics between Zeus and Hera fascinated ancient storytellers. Although Zeus was the king of the gods, Hera often matched or even outmaneuvered him in myths, showing that marriage, even divine marriage, was a balance of power. Scholars still argue whether Hera's refusal to immediately relent here was about vengeance, pride, or simply asserting her authority. Zeus, swallowing his pride, promises never to pursue Io again. He swears by the river Styx, the most binding oath a god can make, that Io will remain untouched and free. Hera studies him for a long, silent moment, before finally, slowly, nodding. "Very well," she says, "but only because I've made my point." And just like that, the gadfly vanishes. Io, lying in the reeds by the Nile, blinks in confusion as the buzzing torment ceases. For the first time in what feels like forever, she can breathe without flinching, can stand without expecting another bite at her heels. She doesn't know why the suffering has stopped, only that it has. Then, in a shimmer of divine light, Zeus appears before her. He raises his hand, and Io's body begins to shift, fur receding into soft skin, hooves reshaping into hands and feet. She stumbles forward on two legs for the first time in months, her voice catching in her throat as she whispers a single word. "Thank you." Quirky tidbit. Some versions of the myth say that Io's transformation left behind a faint mark, a white spot on her forehead in the shape of a crescent moon, a reminder of her time as a cow. Historians still debate whether this detail was symbolic or simply poetic flourish, but it's a small touch that keeps her story alive. Io's life doesn't end in tragedy. She remains in Egypt, where she's welcomed and eventually becomes a queen, revered for her beauty and the quiet strength born of suffering. Some traditions even link her with the goddess Isis, suggesting that her legacy stretched far beyond Greece. Zeus, for his part, keeps his oath. He watches Io from afar, no longer interfering, perhaps a little wiser, or at least a little more cautious than before. Hera, satisfied, turns her attention to other matters, her victory cemented in the memory of all who witnessed the ordeal. Scholars still argue what Io's myth was meant to teach. Was it a cautionary tale about the dangers of attracting divine attention? A commentary on the balance of power between Zeus and Hera? Or simply a story to explain the Bosporus Strait and the spread of Greek influence to Egypt? Whatever the answer, Io's journey remains one of the most enduring examples of how a single mortal could be swept up in the whims of gods. Io stands by the Nile at dawn, the warm breeze tugging at her hair, and lets herself hope for the first time in ages. She survived Hera's wrath, endured Zeus's mistakes, and emerged whole on the other side. Her story, carried on the whispers of travelers and poets, will echo for generations. And now, as the myth fades into the background like a dream slipping away at sunrise, you can let your thoughts drift. Imagine the Nile's waters gliding softly past, their surface golden in the early morning light. The reeds sway gently in the breeze, the world calm and quiet after so much turmoil. There's no buzzing gadfly here, no watchful eyes, no thundering footsteps of gods descending from Olympus. Just stillness. You take a slow, deep breath, as if you're standing there yourself, the air warm and fragrant with blooming flowers. Each inhale feels softer, each exhale longer, like you're melting into the ground beneath your feet. Picture Io, no longer a frightened cow or a weary wanderer, but a woman who's found peace at last. She walks along the riverbank, her steps unhurried, and as she moves further away, the details blur. You're left with only the rhythm of your own breathing, the weight of your body sinking deeper into comfort. Let the sound of the wind brushing through the reeds settle your mind. You've traveled far tonight, but there's nowhere you need to go now. The gods have returned to Olympus. The mortals have gone back to their lives. And you, here in the quiet, can finally rest.